When you were 10, 1 year was 10% of your entire life. When you're 50, 1 year is just 2% of it. You're not imagining it. Time isn't speeding up. Your ruler for measuring it is shrinking. Why does time feel faster the older you get? Start with that math, because it's the oldest explanation, and it's still one of the best. A French philosopher named Paul Janet noticed this back in the 1800s. Every year of your life gets compared, without you realizing it, to every year you've already lived. At age 5, 1 year is a fifth of your whole existence. It feels huge, because it is huge, relative to everything else you know. At age 40, that same 365 days is a tiny sliver of a much longer life. Same number of days, completely different weight. This is called proportional theory, and it explains a lot, but it doesn't explain everything. Here's the part that should feel strange. Ask any adult about a 2-week vacation, and they'll usually tell you it flew by while they were living it. But ask them to think back on it a year later, and it feels like it lasted forever, packed with memory, stretched out compared to 2 ordinary weeks at home that same year. Researcher Claudia Hammond studies exactly this gap, and she has a name for it. The holiday paradox. Time can feel fast while it's happening, and slow in memory at the very same time. That shouldn't make sense if time were just one simple thing your brain tracks. It suggests your brain is actually running 2 separate clocks, one for right now, one for looking back. So what's actually driving the looking back clock? Neuroscientist David Eagleman has spent years studying this question directly, and his research points to something surprisingly concrete. Memory density. Your brain doesn't store time. It stores events. New, unfamiliar, information-packed experiences get laid down in rich, detailed memory. Routine, repetitive days barely get recorded at all because your brain has learned it doesn't need to pay close attention to something it's already seen 1,000 times. Think about your first week at a new job. Every hallway, every name, every tiny procedure was new, and your brain was working overtime to encode all of it. That week probably felt enormous while it was happening, and it probably still feels enormous now, looking back. Compare that to a random Tuesday, 6 months into that same job. Nothing new happened, nothing got specially encoded. When you look back on that Tuesday, there's almost nothing there. Your brain didn't bother writing it down in detail, because nothing about it stood out. This is the actual mechanism behind why childhood summers felt endless. It wasn't really about how young you were, it was about how much unfamiliar, richly encoded experience got packed into that time. New schools, new friends, new skills, new fears, all being learned for the very first time. Your brain built a thick, detailed record of those months, and a thick record, looking back, feels like a long stretch of time. Adulthood, for a lot of people, runs the opposite way. The commute is the same. The routine is the same. The weekly schedule repeats itself so closely that your brain, quite reasonably, stops bothering to encode most of it in detail. Not because nothing happened, because nothing happened that was different enough to be worth remembering closely. Here's what's worth sitting with. This isn't a fixed, unchangeable slide toward faster and faster years. It's actually a pretty direct consequence of how novel your life currently is. People who deliberately introduce new experiences, new environments, new skills, new routines, tend to report a very different subjective sense of time passing, even at the exact same age as someone whose days repeat on a loop. The years don't have to blur together. They blur together specifically when nothing about them was different enough to remember. So why does time feel faster as you get older? Partly simple math, your current year weighed against a longer and longer life, and partly something more within your control than it might feel like. How much of your life is actually new enough for your brain to bother writing down in detail? You can't get more days back, but it turns out you might have more say than you think over how packed or how empty the ones ahead of you end up feeling once you look back on them.